Mate 40 here. So it's fascinating to look at the mainstream media's celebration of Kamala Harris's vice presidential tick, Tim Walz, and big tech celebration. You put Tim Walz into Google News, right? I scrolled and scrolled. I could not find any negative articles about him. Right? When you put almost any subject into Google News, you'll almost never receive links to conservative right-wing publications in the first 30 to 50 options available to you. And the basis for the mainstream media's celebration of Tim Walz is hilarious. It's essentially his mediocrity. So Josh Shapiro is a brilliant, at times, politician and rhetorician. Right? Tim Walz stands out for his mediocrity, and it's his very mediocrity that puts the deeply insecure Kamala Harris at ease. So I was just scrolling through the New York Times opinion section, and there's all this adulation for Tim Walz based on he stands out from the strivers in politics, right? He stands out from those who are highly accomplished and brilliant, right? It's his very mediocrity that helps Tim Walz to stand out. And another tell is when an article, an essay, or a comment can't deal directly with a question. So, common question is to a Democratic strategist or Democratic elite. Tim Walz, when he was in the House of Representatives, was centrist, but when he became governor of Minnesota, he moved to the left. Right? That's incontrovertible. And it's amazing how the Democratic elite try to spin it as, oh, he was just a moderate governor. What's so left-wing about trying to feed children? Right? You would think that if they were proud of being left-wing and progressive, they would celebrate that Tim Walz identifies proudly as progressive and left-wing. It's stunning that they can't admit who they are, right, to be a progressive or left-wing. There's nothing bad, in my opinion, about being progressive or left-wing. Right? I try not to see the world through a partisan lens, but it's a dramatic tell when people cannot admit what they are or admit what Tim Walz is. His congressional record in the House of Representatives was moderate Democrat. When he became governor of Minnesota, he shifted significantly to the left. And that's just the reality. And any time Democratic politician or member of the media can't admit that that transition occurred, it shows that they are ill at ease with reality. The same lack of ease with reality shows in British elite opinion about the platform X, right? They are so desperate to get Elon Musk's platform X shut down. They're blaming X for the riots. And so too, if Republicans blame big tech or the mainstream media for their problems, right, they are running away from reality. Right? I'm not blaming Republican conservative problems on big tech and the media. I'm just pointing out the dramatic discrepancies between reality and large parts of big tech and the mainstream media that amuses me. I don't view it as a visceral mortal threat to the health of the Republic or to the Republican Party. But British elites are nearly uniform in their absolute disdain for free speech and the free expression available on platforms like X. Well, X is about the only major social media platform where you have free speech. I think TikTok is about the worst. Right? TikTok strikes me, just started up a TikTok channel, it strikes me as the most restrictive against conservative opinions. So it's a tell also that you've got all these articles in the mainstream media right now about the ridiculousness of Republican claims that the Democrats have turned into an anti-Semitic party. And Mark Halperin, once again, is a major exception to this. Right? Mark Halperin said that given that Josh Shapiro was obviously both the most talented vice presidential option for Kamala Harris and the most important, in that he's the governor of Pennsylvania, which is probably the most important state in the current elections, that if the Democrats don't choose him because of this tsunami of outrage that has come up among the Democrats, calling him Genocide Josh, when his policies and platform and opinions with regard to Israel pretty much the same as Tim Walz. So when his policies are the same as Tim Walz and the other VP candidates, the only thing that prevents Josh Shapiro from becoming Kamala Harris's vice presidential nominee is her insecurity that he will outshine her, because he's much more rhetorically gifted, he is much more skilled at governing, he's much more at ease with who he is, and that he's Jewish. So I was scrolling through all these mainstream media articles on how ridiculous it is for Republicans to claim that Democrats are becoming an anti-Semitic party, because at least the Democrats had a vice presidential candidate who was Jewish, while none of the leading candidates for the VP spot on the Republican Party were Jewish. I just don't find that a particularly strong argument, right? Nobody is claiming there's a great deal of animus towards Jews in the Democratic Party on the basis of a Jew was not selected to be the vice presidential candidate. It's when obviously the most effective, important, influential, election deciding candidate is Jewish, and then you don't pick him. Right? That's stunning. Right? To compare mediocrity like Tim Walz with someone as skilled as Josh Shapiro, it makes you think, one, Kamala Harris is incredibly insecure that she is unwilling to have someone on the ticket who will likely outshine her, who is just much more verbally deft and much more intellectually formidable. I mean, Kamala Harris had to depend on affirmative action to get into Hastings Law School in California. Right? She's been a repeated beneficiary of affirmative action, and then she failed the California State Bar the first time. So she's not exactly the best and the brightest. Right? She's not a dim bulb. But we're probably talking someone with an IQ in the neighborhood of 115, possibly up to 120. There's nothing in her record or in her unscripted speech that would indicate that we're dealing with an IQ above 120 with Kamala Harris. No, with Tim Walz. J.D. Vance seems like the brightest of all the major party candidates this election cycle. So J.D. Vance probably got an IQ in the 130s. Donald Trump probably in the 120s. Kamala Harris around 115. Tim Walz around 115. So what jumps out to me is when major members of the news media or of politics are just in a fight with reality. And their response to the riots is we need to shut down free expression. Right? That free expression is the reason that we're having all these problems. The expression on X is a result of deplorable conditions in the United Kingdom, where you have outrageous levels of immigration that have severely diminished social cohesion and social trust. I'm still waiting for eloquent arguments to be made on behalf of the UK's various immigrant communities, such as the Muslims. Like, why has turning Britain from an overwhelmingly white and Christian country to a much more diverse country, why is that good for Britain? Like, how is Britain made stronger, more cohesive, more trusting, more productive, more free by the presence of 7% of the population is Muslims, and they're rapidly growing. They have half the labor force participation rate of the general population, and I'm sure that there can be substantial arguments made for why this is a blessing for Britain. I wonder, why does no one make them? And I think the reason that no one makes these arguments is because of liberalism. Liberalism stresses that we are all primarily individuals born with certain inalienable rights, and that we can use the force of our reason to determine right and wrong and our purpose and morality and path in life. And so in liberalism, there's no conception of groups, right? It's individualism focused, and there's no focus on obligations, right? Liberalism is all about rights. It doesn't talk about obligations. And so it just does not occur to people to mount a defense for their group, or to instill an esprit de corps in their group that they need to behave and to speak and to produce in a fashion that will make them seem a blessing to the majority of the population. But just as if you've ridden on a bus and the bus seems to be out of control, speeding, driven recklessly, we all get caught up in all sorts of currents around us that are stronger than us, that we become vulnerable. And for minority groups, it is suicidal to act and to produce and to speak in a way that takes no consideration of the sentiments of the majority. Right? The best way to survive in the world is to produce and to be a blessing to the people around you, and to give them an incentive to want to protect you and to keep you around. Because life often turns brutal, and the basic human instinct with regard to politics is this one of us, or is this one of them? Is this a group that's on our side? Right, so the question was the concern over Josh Shapiro with regard to his Jewishness or with regard to his Zionism. So it seems to me that it was with regard to his Jewishness, because his quote-unquote Zionism was indistinguishable from all the other major Democratic politicians. So Josh Shapiro did not hold substantially different positions with regard to the Jewish state compared to other leading Democratic politicians such as Tim Walz. So he was highly critical of Bibi Netanyahu. He was highly critical of how Israel has conducted the war in Gaza. Right? So his policies and opinions and proposals and analysis of the Jewish state of Israel was indistinguishable from that of Tim Walz and other leading Democratic politicians. So it seems that it was because his name's Shapiro, and I think this reflects on a greater issue of excellence versus equity. So Kamala Harris's focus is on equity. She wants equality of outcomes. To her, equity does not mean equality of opportunity, it means equality of outcomes. And disproportionate group excellence threatens this equity outlook. If you just look at the Olympics, obviously different groups have different gifts. That West Africans dominate the short sprinting events, East Africans dominate longer distance running, and 800 and 1500 meter races are up for grabs between any group. But in life, you constantly find different groups just completely dominating, completely out of proportion to their numbers in the general population. And I think Kamala Harris feeling insecure about Josh Shapiro's Jewish excellence is a nugget of insight into this wider issue about equity versus excellence, right? If you foster equality of outcome, you reduce incentives for excellence. The more affirmative action you have, the more diversity, equity, inclusion you have, right? The more you reduce the incentives to be excellent, right? I was rarely excellent in school because I overwhelmingly had a Seventh-day Adventist upbringing, and schooling that severely frowned upon excellence. All right, let me rephrase that. It frowned upon competition, and I have to get my competitive juices flowing to do my best work. Right? If I don't feel competitive, if I don't feel challenged, right, I am less likely to produce excellence. But those rare times when I produced academic excellence, right, is when I was able to get my competitive juices flowing. And competition tends to be a dirty word in female-dominated spaces. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is a female-dominated space. And policies creating equity, meaning equality of outcomes for different groups, right, that's going to substantially reduce the incentives to be excellent. And I've had my life transformed by the power of excellence. And I was basically bedridden for 6 years, and then I found an excellent Jewish psychiatrist, right? My excellent Jewish girlfriend on the other side of the country, all right? She was in Orlando, Florida. I started talking to her after I answered some singles ads in the Orlando Jewish newspaper in 1993. And one thing that excited me about her, she apparently had this great psychiatrist, the late Daniel Goldwyn. And when I decided to drop another girlfriend, move in with this woman in Orlando, Florida, and she took me to this psychiatrist, he got me on a medication that restored normal life to me after 6 years being bedridden. And the difference between an excellent lawyer and an average lawyer will often be the difference between winning and losing. So I love the culture of excellence, and I'm not a fan of the culture of equity, meaning equality of outcomes. So YouTube's been fascinating for me. Over the past 6 months, I probably averaged 200 or so visitors an hour on my main YouTube channel, this one. And then for last week, I was averaging well over 1,000 visitors an hour. And then suddenly I post some critical videos about Kamala Harris, and my views to my channel are dialed back to like 10 an hour. So I went from averaging about 1,500 visitors an hour to averaging 10 an hour. It just like happened overnight, just boom. YouTube flipped some switch, and I was uploading the same amount of new original content. I was uploading the same amount of topical shorts, and YouTube can just flip the switch and just crush my traffic. And when I'm preparing my shows every day, right, I'll often put the topics that I want to discuss into Google News, and it takes so much effort to find any conservative or right-wing perspective via Google News. You essentially have to go to the right-wing outlets themselves, such as The Federalist or The Daily Caller or Commentary Magazine, to be able to find a right-wing perspective. And so these rioters in the United Kingdom, right, I don't think they have an average IQ much above 100. So I don't think they are thinking deeply and philosophically about these issues. But they probably have a legitimate sense that the game is rigged against them, because in the dominant left-wing politics and dominant politics of the day in the First World, identity politics is wonderful for some groups, and it's a horrible, terrible horror for other groups. So it's great when blacks and trans and LGBTQ communities practice identity politics, right? When women practice identity politics. But it's terrible when whites practice identity politics, when men practice it, when Christians practice it, when the majority practice it, then it's horrible. And so I think this tilted playing field, this two-tier policing, is what's behind much of the outrage that we see fueling social media when people get to speak freely, and now spilling out into the streets in the United Kingdom.